Good afternoon, class. One of the great things I think about the state of where we are is looking for changes. It is an economy that's working through a period of rapid economic change and downturn. So as we look towards what our next great wave is, one of the things we can do is look to the past. And so I'll start with the understanding that hemp and cannabis together are both federally outlawed substances. However, hemp used to be the foundation of the American economy. So that's why we're starting this topic. It's not just money policy, economic policy, and cannabis. So the state of play. What's macroeconomics? Macroeconomics is the study of the structure and performance of national economies and of the policy that governments use to affect economic performance. As we move forward and ask, well, what's the state of play between macroeconomic policy and what I would deem mattress policy? Is monetary policy involves changing the interest rates of banks and money flow to influence money supply. Fiscal policy involves the government changing tax rates and the levels of government spending to influence the aggregate demand. The mattress policy that we're so speaking about now involves scared cannabis business owners keeping billions of dollars out of circulation and keeping that unable to be injected into monetary and fiscal policy cycles. As we have here a small cycle scale of where the typical flow of funds goes in. And when you say that there's a billion-dollar industry, almost $22 billion industry that's not injected into this cycle, what we have is a huge problem. So, what are the key objectives of macroeconomic policy? Well, consumer price indexes, including price stability, a sustainable growth of GDP, combating rising unemployment and ensuring rising employment rates, maintaining average higher standards of living, improving global competitiveness, and ensuring a more equitable economic distribution of wealth. As we move forward and we say, well, where are we at now? What's the state of play in our country currently? Currently, we're just leaving a great recession. Since 2009, the United States has been trying to recover their economy from great pre-recession levels. In 2015, it was estimated that the United States still needs about 6 to 5.7 million jobs, it's a little typo, to correct the unemployment rate. And that's according to the Employment Policy Institute. Current employment estimates indicate that it'll take almost 5 years to clear the unemployment rate at the current pace. Well, that's if it doesn't go back down because of economic shock and political changes that are influenced by monetary policy and current government changes that we're enduring. So as we look forward, recession defined. Economic recession is typically defined as a decline in gross domestic product for 2 or more consecutive quarters. GDP is the market value of all goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. A key figure in determining economic growth and the propensity of recessions is the level of consumer and business confidence in the American dollar and spending and in everyday life. If confidence is low, people fear they may be unemployed or that their business will not make money, then you look at spending less. And honestly, when we look at the type of policies that are involved and the type of discussions we have here in class, it is possible for people to talk themselves into a recession. So when industries start speaking and banks start talking and they decide collectively that confidence has gone down, such as which may happen in an election cycle as we just currently experience, you have an ability for the country to enter in a recession that's self-created. All right, so I had a quick video here. 1 second. So we're going to look at the stats of what cannabis can really do, creating jobs and restoring confidence. Number 1 in California, it's an increase of 1,400 jobs. Colorado, 1,077 jobs, a 19% increase previously. 601 new job openings in Washington State. Arizona, 244 new openings. Oregon, 209 new job openings. When you see the number of increases, increase from the previous month, previous year. So as we round out the last top 10 of increased jobs just from the beginning of cannabis coming. So we look at sales, we have 1,400 new openings, jobs in processing, 1,200 new openings. Managerial jobs, almost 1,000 new openings. dispensary running operations, almost 870 new openings. So we look cross-border to Canada. So British Columbia rose from 23rd to 24th overall openings. So we just look at some of the waves that cannabis has now. So we say, well, what's the state of play? What is the U.S. green market? Cannabis and consumer demands continue to rise for what you actually say now is a federally illegal product. So that's very interesting that demand rates are rising for something that's illegal. Every cannabis market is experiencing growth. Currently, we have almost half of the U.S. Government experiencing some kind of growth or market attribution due to cannabis-related businesses. Social acceptance. At one point, it would be taboo for me to get up here in front of an MBA class of this level, being an attorney, and speak to you about jobs that relate to an illegal job market. That is if you don't look at the history behind the product and look at actual social policy. So I'll change the tempo a little bit and speak about a certain demographic in veterans. So veterans have a conflict in different issues that medically can be helped, assisted with THC, cannabis, CBD, the dialects of it. And we know that because pharmaceuticals, major U.S. pharmaceuticals have developed a synthetic version of it called Marinol. And that's sold in mass quantities to the government now. So we look at the use and socially acceptable rate, not only for recreational, but for medical, now transitioning already back into an official government role, except that they have to create it synthetically because it remains federally illegal. So technology makes it easier to grow. As we look at cannabis, what is it? It's primarily agriculture. The United States Foundation is in agriculture. It has always been in providing resources, food, materials to produce our own products. And that's agriculture. So cannabis, number one, is an agricultural job. Many unknown facts about it is it serves to clean land. If you plant hemp outside of Chernobyl, hemp and cannabis is planted outside of Chernobyl to clean the environment after a nuclear attack. And so we look at some of the abilities of what hemp used to do for our economies, making ropes, and even our U.S. dollar was created out of it. And that also is federally illegal at this point. So when we look at technology and what it's doing, and we talk about technology and macroeconomics, operational technologies are helping businesses create jobs. Different point-of-sale applications, some members in class and I have talked about RFID tracking for each plant creating jobs. The computer technology that goes into tracking the affinity applications that go with new softwares that show people how to use the plant, the strand, grow new markets, and seed to sale tracks. And so when we say all this happens and margins remain substantial despite the fact that there is also a black market, and I think it's a little bit hard to understand because there's a gray market, which means that states can operate cannabis under the Cole Memo, without having any intervention from the federal government at this time. And then you have the absolute black market where it's not regulated by anyone and absolutely illegal. So by 2020, cannabis, the industry is expected to pass $22 billion. In relation, the NFL is worth about $5 billion. So it's going to be one of the largest things out. And so we look at revenue off tax sales in January 2014. We're almost at $10 million just in January 2014 for Colorado, and the same for Washington State. So state of play. How do we create jobs, restore confidence? Okay. So during the Great Depression, the federal government assumed responsibility for job creation. And so as we look at Keynesian economics, it emerged at this time as a dominant economic theory to restore economic growth and employment. Keynesian economics used government-infused money into the private sector to spur job growth and economic output. The inability currently of the United States government to inject policy into the cannabis market is a lost opportunity for job creation and taxation. When you say $22 billion, the United States government has no hand on it except for locking individuals up. They can't tax it, but they can tax those individuals. You're talking about a weird disparate growth. All right, so how does that affect mattress policy? What did I mean by mattress policy? So federal law prohibits banks and credit unions for taking cannabis businesses' money. So $22 billion is not going to go into our banks. How does that sound? Ludicrous. Where does it go? In the mattresses. Okay, so businesses can't get loans. Then customers have to pay in cash, and state tax collection agencies are actually receiving cash in lump sums from businesses. So when you look kind of a different breakout title here, we see over 55% of typical funding for small businesses comes from banks in one form or another. That's lending. When we talk about interest rates and the government's ability to influence this, and folks trying to get access to this $22 billion industry, how can banks not capitalize on this by having interest rates that are effective? And we go, okay, well, how do small businesses actually get into order? Personal credit, credit lines, personal loans. But when you take a whole pie out, it changes how our economy works. So once again, banks are missing the way. Over 51 successful businesses actually cite, in general, using banks to start a business. That can't happen in cannabis. So it can't affect our interest rates. It can't help us. And so when we look at, once again, where we're having to go with the Kaufman Foundation for businesses that come into existence, when you look at credit cards, bank loans, and personal savings, these are your top factors into entering into a small business market. Once again, from a macroeconomic scale, taking bank loans out of the equation has a really, really interesting effect in our inability to continue to move forward to change our inflation rates, our interest rates, and also our overall earnings. So cannabis policy is economic policy at this time. We know that because on a scale of saying if you determine something is illegal federally and you outlaw it, though it has such an extreme revenue spectrum, it has now turned into an economic policy by virtue of that criminal policy, that legislative policy. So we know that from this presentation, cannabis creates jobs. We know that cannabis increases taxable income. We know that cannabis is a technological way, and we also know that federal policy stifles U.S. market growth, but it's also caused market confusion and danger by not legalizing cannabis federally, because then they can't regulate it. So, final takeaways. Excuse me, typo. Final takeaways. Finals on my mind, but final takeaways. The U.S. government will not legalize cannabis, and as a byproduct, it allows the fastest growing market in the world to be devoid of economic policy influence. This is a huge banking safety issue with billions of dollars unaccounted for in banks. And cannabis has the potential with a few changes to recreate agricultural, technical, and medical job markets. I want you to note that I put one here. Each one of these stands alone and affects a different level of policy, human interactions, and life. Thank you. Any questions?
So I've grown up with the whole pot issue as a little kid. It was the 60s and all the way till now. And so one of the things that has always, usually, not always, been come into the conversation about legalizing pot is, well, we have alcohol that's legal and it was banned and it was banned for the field and we had prohibition and there's TV shows and movies about it. And there's always been a parallel made, and you didn't touch on that. And so I'm wondering if there's a reason you didn't, and what you think about it either way.
Well, there's two reasons. And I think the two reasons that I didn't touch on it are how cannabis is broken out, one medical and one recreational. I think in general that all the policies that we have affect both. And so no matter what we do on the economic policy scale as it relates to regulation, deregulation of cannabis, and comparing it to alcohol versus comparing it to medicine has only effect on how we allow it to become illegal. It doesn't have an effect on how the industry will grow. These projections for $22 billion don't account for if it's medical or recreational. It's just going to happen. So I didn't find the need to create divisiveness or even compare to other products because of the matter that no matter what happens when you release that gate, and honestly, even if it doesn't release at the rate states are legalizing and the federal government taking its hands off, it's just going to be a missed accounting factor along the way.
To Ed's point, and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason marijuana was ultimately, the prohibition on marijuana, wasn't it its similarity to another product, which was then hemp? Was that not more a big business person saying, hey, and that's what I would be more interested in knowing, is why it became illegal to begin with, because if it is, I think there's marijuana and hemp the same, would be my first question. And why was it? Why was it made illegal? I've heard things about that. DuPont was a big reason as to why it was actually made illegal, because the marijuana plant looks too similar to the hemp plant, and DuPont wanted to make sure that his nylon and everything that he was producing was the one that was used by everyone else. So, is there any truth to that? I guess the question is, why did they make it illegal? Is that why? Just because it looks like hemp?
I can answer that. We look at marijuana, the first thing we should do is change our vernacular and say cannabis. The name of the plant is cannabis. And the term marijuana stuck because of the racist and really negative intent by the Texas State Border Patrol, which later on became U.S. Customs, and their ability to want to limit the earning power of Hispanics crossing the border selling cannabis. We started in around 1904, prohibiting the importation of marijuana, which was called in Mexico, due to a policy that didn't want to allow these individuals to have commerce. When you start seeing the beginning of prohibition, the push was towards taxation. The rationale was it needs to be taxed and be controlled because of the illicit behaviors that minorities displayed when using substances. Substance should be banned because it allowed minorities, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, access to Caucasian women. But mostly it was commerce, and that's why when you have the first actual laws, 1937, you have a marijuana tax act, not a prohibition. When Harry Anslinger came on board, Eric and Hoover gave them a lot of control to try to allow the federal government to impose laws that would basically have society lock up minorities, lock up individuals to ensure that they follow the morals of the country. He was able to sell the race component as using the Uniform Narcotics Act as a way for major cities to control crime by locking up minorities and lower socioeconomic status. When President Nixon took office, he created the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the Drug Enforcement Agency was tasked with ranking and scheduling all known chemical substances in the world. The large factors for ranking them was there a known medical value, and what was the propensity for harm. And by that time in the 60s, we look at public housing and having a violation of a Schedule 1 substance or even a Schedule 2 substance could disqualify you for public welfare, public aid, so it's still used as a device of control within other systems. Recently, when we look at even the attempt for minorities to enter into cannabis, that's been thwarted in a lot of places. It's being very much so that cannabis is still being whitewashed. However, the government systems, like in Maryland, that picked out who the applicants were, they went in and changed the ranking factors for geographic diversity, but excluded factors for like veterans preference or even gender diversity, having female members. The entire industry movement has really been one that downtrods everyone that's not basically a white male. My name is Brandon Wyatt, and I'm a social engineer. I use the law and business tools to create changes in communities the most effective about the drug war. So, it's this thing. I wanted to play that for you because when you asked for background as to how the prohibition started, and it's related to commerce. You had a minority group, Hispanics, bringing over cannabis from Mexico, and the Texas State Border Patrol basically instituted a violation of international treaty law by regulating that at that time to the point where it reached the Supreme Court, and they had to make a determination in 1904, which ends up coming out as the Uniform Narcotics, the Cannabis Tax Act. So basically, they taxed it first. And then once they couldn't control it because it is a naturally grown substance, they went from taxing it to making it illegal. Any other questions?
Is it dangerous? I mean, the consumption of cannabis, is it dangerous to the human body? Don't you think that's the reason why governments are not ready to legalize the use of marijuana?
Well, the only danger that's really going to be presented from...
I guess that is, the repercussions of its use.
Right, it's the repercussion. The danger to your person comes from the punishment that can be instituted. I'm not going to say in an economics class I can break down all the health issues, but I have spoken with the top cannabis doctors in the world. They Skype me, they call me, we speak about different matters. And in relation, when we look at the known harms or death or injuries that come from cannabis consumption, it really can be related to a byproduct, becoming intoxicated on cannabis, consuming cannabis and driving, doing things that put you in harm's way. But mostly, the harm that comes from it is exhibited to the human body is that of one which happens when you consume an illegal substance and you're caught for that. So more people are jailed and harmed. Absolutely, there's no known deaths from cannabis use. In fact, there's more results from lives being saved using cannabis. So you have countries that are not with a dominant minority component, say like Israel, they've been issuing cannabis oil since 1987 for anybody that comes into the doctor's office and that's diagnosed with cancer. Before they go to chemo, in addition to chemo, they're giving cannabis oil. So we've been doing that since the 80s. So, you know, the reason that happens there, why? Because it's a homogenous population for the most part. Yes, ma'am.
How long have you been working to legalize cannabis?
It's 2016, 2009. I started writing policies and working with different groups to get involved with cannabis. To date, I've probably helped write about 5 state laws. And so I do have an intimate understanding about how the business policy is implemented, but more so, intimate understanding about how many policies are, as I spoke about in the video, are co-correlated in our economic policy related to cannabis, such as not qualifying for public aid and access. So, you know, it's one of those tools where I found out that not only may someone not have a job, they're medically needed, but if they consume it, they're caught, they're kicked out of public housing, they're kicked off public aid benefits. Many friends of mine were kicked out of school. You can't get federal financial aid after that point. Almost 200,000 students a year lose their federal financial aid due to a cannabis-related conviction. And at that point, once I got my bar degree, I decided I would fight.
So you can be addicted of rape and still get all those.
I was in.
You can still get all those benefits.
Right.
If you're convicted of rape, you can still
right.
get financial aid and get it.
Absolutely. It only relates to losing your federal financial aid only correlates to being convicted for a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substance. And so, as Alo just pointed, when we talk about economic policy and the effects of those criminal policies on economics, now you damage the earning ability for how many students, 200,000 a year, over how long, and punish them harder than someone who's convicted of rape or murder. You get charged for murder, you can still get federal aid. You get a charge for one joint, you lost your opportunity to go to college, period. And so that affects our economy how? That affects our employment how?
I mean, also a huge point. Yeah, the huge point though is the amount of savings, besides the incarceration rates, which are absolutely ridiculous, especially for the minority, the amount of money we spend enforcing borders in the South, where we're sending an exorbitant amount of money to the DEA to monitor planes that are coming, monitor everything coming over for a product that essentially is no different from alcohol. It shouldn't be that.
Or tobacco.
But or tobacco or whatever else. The amount of money we spend is just insane. Locking up and enforcement. You know, probably would cut murders down too as well if you legalize something like that, because you're going to have less cartels going over our border selling a product that obviously people want, right? It'd be better to have it internal to the U.S.
Well, I guess to respond to that just quickly, one of the biggest things, I guess, in the culmination of it all is that they're never gonna stop. It was a plant that grew naturally. It was a substance that grew naturally. Hemp grew naturally. It was never going to be stopped. So enforcement costs were always targeted towards a method of trying to population control, economic control. So now you have a point of business where it makes more sense for them to gain economic interest by legalizing and taxing, as they did initially, than it does to continue to institute policies that remove the ability for individuals to earn a living in general by being convicted, and 2, individuals that are in this industry to assume bank loans, and 3, individuals who are looking towards helping themselves medically and being able ready to work, and the rest are affected. So, thank you.
You want to get some?
Recreational. Well, the